den på? Nei. Nå den på. Ja, kjempefint. Kjære alle sammen, velkommen. Velkommen til Agenda. Hvis dere jeg skal huske å si med en gang at hvis dere har lyst til å twittre underveis, det kjempefint om dere bruker hashtag agenda, så kan alle følge med på hverandre. Det snart 1 år siden vi hadde vårt første arrangement her på Kulturhuset. Det var 18. juni i fjor. Da hadde vi NATO-sjefen på scenen, som ble grillet av Åsne Seierstad. Veldig gøy. Jeg har store forventninger til i kveld også. Men jeg har lyst til å si litt om det året som har gått. Agenda ble jo dannet fordi vi ønsker å bidra til en mer kunnskapsbasert politisk debatt. Vi ønsker å reise de store og viktige spørsmålene, og vi skal bidra til nytenkning og politikkutvikling. Og så spørsmålet, nå har vi holdt på snart 1 år. Får vi det til? Min forrige jobb var jo i bank, så jeg er veldig glad i tall. Så jeg har noen tall til dere. 27, 50, 4800, 2, veldig bra, 10. Vi er litt mange til å ha quiz, så jeg tenkte jeg skulle si svarene med en gang. Vi har hatt 27 arrangementer. Det nesten annen uke. De fleste her på Kulturhuset, men vi har vært mye rundt i landet også. Vi har hatt over 50 kronikker på trykk. Vi har hatt 4800 gjester på arrangementene våre. Og med det vi har her i dag, så tror jeg vi runder 5000 i dag. Vi har gitt ut 2 filmer, og vi har laget 10 notater. Og så det sikkert en del i publikum her som skeptiske til at man kan telle og måle alt. Ny public management og sånn. Vi også litt skeptiske til det. Vi har til og med gitt et notat om at man ikke kan telle og måle alt. Men det gir et lite bilde likevel. Og jeg har jo ikke tid til å gå gjennom alt vi har gjort, men jeg har lyst til å si litt om et tema vi har brukt mye tid på. Og det ulikhet. Det en av vår tids store utfordringer. Og en av de som har bidratt til denne debatten Tony Blairs, som gjennom et imponerende forskningsarbeid sammen med forskere fra veldig mange land har dokumentert endringen i formuesfordelingen i verden, og viser at i en del land vi nå i ferd med å få en formuesfordeling som ligner på den vi hadde på 1800-tallet. Norge ikke der, men vi ser de samme trendene, vi ser de samme utviklingstrekkene, og forskjellene øker også her. Så vi har bidratt med å være med å gi ut boka til Tony Blairs. Vi inviterte han til Norge for å møte norske politikere og norske forskere for å diskutere. Og han åpenbart en viktig stemme, en av mange som dokumenterer at forskjellene øker. Og siden vi snart 1 år, så kan jeg få lov å tulle litt med Civita. Jeg kan det, ja. Civita har nå gitt ut 4 notater om Piketty. Og formålet med alle notatene å vise at Piketty ikke relevant for Norge. Og så har de i siste notatet så brukt en hel side på å fortelle at agenda tar feil. Og vi synes jo egentlig at det var litt stas. Og vi har da valgt å skrive notater om hvordan ulikheten har økt i Norge, og hva vi skal gjøre for å bekjempe det. Vi kommer til å fortsette med dette temaet. Til høsten så kommer Atkinson. Han læremesteren til Piketty, og også en av de hotteste kandidatene til å få Nobelprisen i økonomi. Og så kommer Robert Putnam som vår gjest. Han har en av de fremste på sosial mobilitet og har kommet med ny, spennende forskning. Så vi skal fortsette å bidra til en kunnskapsbasert debatt om viktige temaer i Norge. Vi har gjennom dette året fått gode samarbeidspartnere. Blant andre Universitetet i Oslo, Universitetet i Tromsø, Markedshøgskolen, Cappelen Damm, NHO, mange fagforeninger, Forskningsrådet, for å nevne noen. Men de aller viktigste for oss, det dere, som kom på arrangementene våre, som twitterer og engasjerer dere, og som med og gjør at agenda eksisterer og finnes. Vi synes det utrolig stas at så mange finner veien til møtene våre. Og det vi skal introdusere i dag, dere har sikkert hørt om crowdfunding. Det veldig fresht, veldig moderne, og i dag har dere muligheten til å være med på det. Jeg regner med at alle på plassene her så ligger det en sånn liten lapp. Skal vi se. Sånn, den. Og der står det at man kan sende en SMS til agenda til 2430 og skrive agenda. Da donerer dere 200 kroner og bidrar til at vi kan fortsette å ha åpne arrangementer som gratis for alle, og invitere spennende mennesker å være med og holde en god debatt i Norge. Som i dag. I dag har vi fått med oss Alastair Campbell. Han var strategisk rådgiver for Tony Blair. Han har en del av æren, eventuelt skylda for New Labour, den tredje vei. Han kontroversiell. Han har vært direkte involvert i mange saker som har fått store konsekvenser. Han fortsatt rådgiver for Labour og for flere sosialdemokratiske partier i Europa. Og som en del har sett på sosiale medier i dag, han også rådgiver for VM i Qatar. Men hos oss skal han snakke om fremtiden for sentrum-venstre i europeisk politikk, og sikkert litt mer. Til å intervjue han så har vi fått tidligere journalist, tidligere statsråd og nå nestleder i Arbeiderpartiet, Hadia Tajik, en av Norges grundigste og mest kunnskapsrike politikere. Så her det bare å glede seg. Ta vel imot Hadia Tajik og Alastair Campbell.
So, Mr. Campbell, welcome back to Norway. You've been here many times. There's so many issues and so many topics to cover, so I hope you don't mind that we just dive right into it. Mm-hmm. Now, 1 month ago, the British Labour Party and Ed Miliband lost the election. Why was that?
Because insufficient numbers of people voted for us. And that is down to them and the decisions that they make. And as you know, politics ultimately is about individuals making very individual decisions. But I think if I had to try to alight upon the strategic and other questions, I think that if you are in an election campaign, if you're behind on leadership and you're behind on the economy, you're always going to struggle. And we were behind on both. And the thing I would say, being very frank, is that I think we contributed to both of those things, particularly on the economy. Because the reality is that for various reasons, which I sort of understand, but the Labour Party under Ed just did not defend Labour's record under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. And I think that was a mistake. For me, the message on the economy should have been elections are always about the future, but you have to have a reckoning on the past. To my mind, we should have been saying you are always better off under Labour than the Tories, because the Tories only care about the people at the top. Does that sound familiar?
It does.
Good. We had 10 years of growth and prosperity, which ended badly because of the crash, and the idea that the crash was caused by Gordon Brown overspending is a complete and utter nonsense, and we could have had a much more nuanced argument. Instead of which, we played it because we kept saying, possibly rightly, but we kept saying we didn't regulate the banks properly. I think we can accept that. But what that did was fuel the idea that these attacks against us on the economy were actually sound. So the public ended up, the undecideds, and remember elections, you've got Labour people, you've got Tories who are always going, I'll always be Labour, but you've got the undecideds who move around, and they, in large numbers, bought the idea that we were to blame for the economic crash. And I don't think we recovered from that. And on leadership, I mean, I don't like David Cameron. I don't think he's been a very good prime minister, but he sort of looks the part. People don't look at him and think it's absurd that you're the prime minister. And
are you saying that people looked at Ed Miliband and thought it's absurd that you can become prime minister?
I think a lot of people didn't get over the idea at the start when he became leader that, if you like, we'd picked the wrong one. Now, I'm just telling the truth there. That's what you have to listen to people. You don't just listen to them during election campaigns. Listen to them over the parliament. And I mean, one of the reasons I was here today was to talk about my new book, Winners, which is meant to be here. And if I can look down the camera, and if Random House are watching, you fucked up again. Because the books aren't here. So I hope you didn't come to buy a book, because you can't get one. But one of the reasons I wrote that book was actually to point out, people keep talking about learning the lessons of defeat, okay? Learn the lessons of winning. Learn the lessons of victory. Learn about why winners have won. And we've got ourselves in Britain in this absurd position where Tony Blair, yes, Iraq was controversial. Yes, some people look at him and think, you're too suntanned and you make too much money. But he was a complete and total winner. He was the most successful election winner we ever had. And we've got ourselves in a position where you can't talk about that. Because it's, so we're now having a debate. I mean, I said after we lost, I said, let's have a proper debate about why we lost. Instead of which, we rushed straight into a leadership election, which is a substitute for a debate. It becomes a personality contest about who's going to be the next leader. And the reality is, I'll tell you how you win elections. Yes, it's down to the people in the end, but I'll tell you how the parties have to give themselves the best chance of winning an election. You have to have a good, strong leader who can appeal to people in the business community and who can appeal to people who are unemployed and to the cleaner and the porter. He's got to be able to appeal across regions and across classes. You've got to have a clear, compelling strategy that is thought through, that is tough, that addresses all the internal arguments and dynamics and resolves them. That's what New Labour did. You have to have a team of people who are the best at what they do. You have to go out and get them because politics is tough and it's really, you need really good people. You then have to motivate and inspire people at every level of the organisation and around the country to get involved. You need policies that speak to people's lives and that are realistic and credible. You need innovation. You need resilience. Once you've got all that stuff, you still might lose. But if you don't have that stuff, you've got no chance of winning.
But when you're saying this now, it's sounding obvious. But at election day, you wrote a blog saying why Miliband would win, should win, and why Labour victory was good for the country.
Well, Labour victory would have been good for the country. Right?
It didn't happen, though. And why were you wrong?
I was wrong. I probably wasn't wrong because, do you know what happened? I'll tell you what happened. No, I'll tell you what happened. In that, did I really think that? I thought it as I wrote it. Deep down, did I really feel it? I was in the BBC studio when the exit poll came out, okay? We'd spent the last few days of the campaign, because of the polls and because of the messages we were getting back from the country, all the constituency organisers, we honestly thought we were on for being the second largest party, but with the Conservatives unable to form a majority. And if you can't form a majority, it then goes to the second party in our constitution. And then he can go out and try to build the alliances needed. And because we had this situation with the Scottish National Party, where Ed had made clear we weren't going to go into coalition with them, but they had sort of made clear they'd rather have a Labour government than a Tory government, we thought that might work. Now, looking back, I don't know why I thought that could happen. But it was the polls, and I'll tell you, you've got to be really, really careful about polls. And I throw this out for you because you're at the stage now where you've got to start. You've got your regional elections coming up, and then you've got your general election after that. You've got to start framing the question for those now, because what happened was that the perfect question for us, for the framing of the campaign, would have been, given all the bad things they've done, does David Cameron deserve another 5 years? Most people would say no to that, okay? What the framing question became was, is an Ed Miliband-led minority government propped up by the SNP a stable form of government? And guess what? A lot of people said no. And that was driven, and to be fair to the Tories, I mean, I've got a real dilemma, right? Because I've written in the chapter on strategy in the book, why David Cameron, even though he was Prime Minister, is actually a loser. Because he should have won the last election with the majority, 2010. and I explain why he didn't. And I say it's because he wasn't clear about his strategy. Well, he's won this one. Now, do I update the paperback and call him a winner? This is a difficult question for me. I've decided that what I'm going to say is it wasn't so much that he won, but we lost. And I think that's true. He's certainly not going on the front cover along with Nelson Mandela and Angela Merkel, that's for sure. So it's been very painful, actually, because I think we should have won. I think we could have won. And we didn't. And now we've got these people back for 5 years. And do you know what? I don't think we're at the bottom. I think things could get worse. Because Scotland, I was in Scotland at the weekend. I was walking down the road with my brother. This traffic warden. I mean, you've just got to be really careful about how quickly things move in the world now. When people say nothing ever changes, my God. Scotland is, all my life has been a Labour country, okay? And that's one of the reasons why it isn't anymore, because we all sort of slightly took it for granted. So I'm walking down the road with my brother, and this traffic warden comes over. Very nice guy. He says, "Oh, hello," shakes hands, "Nice to see you, good to see you keep coming back," and da-da-da. He says, "You do know you're absolutely finished here, don't you?" I said, "Well, that's a nice thing. Well, why do you say that?" He said, "I say it because you are." He said, "I've voted Labour all my life, and I'm telling you, you're finished. Because we've got an alternative now. England doesn't have an alternative. UKIP's not an alternative. They're just, nasty, right-wing, da-da-da-da. But if they've got an alternative, you've got to watch out." And I said, "Okay, well, what do you think we should do then?" He said, "Well, nothing you can do. You're finished." I said, "Okay, well, thanks. Nice seeing you. Yeah, all the best." Now, I don't think it's necessarily true, but I don't think any political party in the modern world should think that it has a kind of divine right to exist and a divine right to get into power again. And what I was hoping in doing the book at the time that I did, for me, it was a loyal way. There's not a word of criticism of the Labour Party in there, right? It was a loyal way of saying, forget all this talk about the lessons of defeat. Look at the lessons of winners. Look how they do it. Strategy, teamship, leadership, innovation. I'll tell you the other reason why I was wrong. This is a really important point about data and polling. Because when I did the book, I love all sport, okay? I'm obsessed with sport. And in fact, I'll let you into a little secret. The reason I'm here tonight is because I'm a friend of Jan Åge Fjørtoft and Per Mathias Høgmo, and I'm going to see the match tonight, okay? And I thought I'd fit in a little bit of a chat with you guys, okay? That's why I'm here. But sports people, to me, the top end of sport, they've got more winning mindsets than most people in politics. The best ones are brilliant on strategy. One of my favourite chapters in the book is a discussion with Jose Mourinho about what strategy means. They're self-evidently better at teamship. Okay? When I watched Barcelona play the other night, or when I saw that Juventus goal, that is teamship, right? And sometimes in politics, the 1997 campaign, we felt like Barcelona against Rosenberg. Okay? That's how it felt. That was for your colleague deputy, because he never stopped talking about them at lunchtime. I liked his commitment. So that's how it felt. And politics, to my mind, is uniquely bad at teamship. So that was another lesson I wanted to put out there and say, look, can we please remember what Harry Truman said? It's amazing what a small group of men can achieve, provided nobody cares who gets the credit. Right.
But if you're comparing politics with teamship and football, I have to ask you, which one of the players in the British Labour Party would you take off the field?
The ones now? None of them. None of them. But I'll tell you what I will say is if I go back to the Blair-Brown era, you see, this thing about teamship is so important. Tony, I think, is when John Smith, who was Tony's predecessor, when he died, if you'd have said to most people in the Labour Party the day before he died, who's the next leader of the Labour Party, most people would have said Gordon Brown. Okay? because actually they didn't have to think about it. John Smith wasn't dead. He was there. He was leading the Labour Party. When John Smith died, within minutes, people were saying, it's got to be Tony Blair, because they saw something in him. And I do think that, I mean, Gordon was brilliant in lots of ways. But if Gordon could have reconciled himself to the idea that Tony was the right leader and he was the right chancellor and they were a fantastic, formidable team, and the team around them, me and Peter Mandels and all these other people, that we were there with, I think we'd still be there. I honestly do think we'd still be there, because the Conservatives do not have a better agenda for Britain. And that's what I find so depressing about it.
But if you don't mind me saying so, you're sort of dodging the main questions here,
Oh.
and we can leave the player question out of them.
No, there's nobody to take it. There's nobody to take out. I don't want to listen.
But the teamship is not working.
No, the teamship could work. It's difficult for teamship when you're in the middle of a leadership election and they're all pretending to be different. Okay? Teamship to me, I'll tell you what teamship means. It means when you've got a strategy that everybody kind of understands and buys into, and then they take it out and they all know their role. So, for example, the team, in the book, the two campaigns apart from our own, the two campaigns I've written about most are Obama 08 and Modi. The Modi campaign in the Indian elections last year was incredible. The most impressive election ever, in some ways. He did things which we have never thought about. Do you know about the hologram? He's in the Guinness Book of Records already for having done the most hologrammed event ever. Spoke to 1.7 million people at the same event through a hologram all around the country. Good idea. Maybe Norway, don't know. India, big country. But the thing about those campaigns is that when I talk about teamship, it's about building a team of people that the leaders will never necessarily even meet or know exist. Too much of politics is about saying, right, there's the leader, there's the people at the top, and we decide everything. Fine, you do decide the strategy, definitely. But then your purpose has to be to get that strategy out through the entire country so that everybody understands what the strategy is, so that you've then got people in every workplace, on every bus, on every train. You sit on a train, you hear two people saying, oh, that blooming Jonas, la doo-dee-da-da, oh, don't like him much, he's this, he's that. And there's somebody there saying, excuse me, I know all about that, I know about him. I'm this, I'm that, I'm involved in this. And the thing about the Obama campaign in particular, people focus on all the fundraising that went on. I'm not saying that wasn't important. Fundraising on social media was important. But the real genius of their campaign was to use social media to find supporters that they then turned into activists who became part of the team and they knew their role. And I think in sport in particular, in business because it's more hierarchical, in politics it's different. And I think it's because politicians, when you decided to become a politician, that's a very individual decision. You joined the team, but you're an individual. And you're not a human being if you don't also think about your own ambition from time to time. Okay? Everybody does that. But actually, one of the reasons, maybe this is why I never became an elected politician and did it as I've done it, is that I am a real team player. That's why I love sport. I love being part of teams. And I didn't mind subsuming my ego, which is large, my ambitions, which are large. I didn't mind pouring them into the idea of the team. And I just wish more of us did that.
How many years have you been an advisor to the Labour Party?
Well, to be honest, are there any journalists here? There's some journalists here?
Of course there are.
Okay. I was never really a proper journalist. I was a journalist. I told the truth as best as I could. I didn't make up stories like today's journalists in Britain do. But I was very, very biased in favour of the Labour Party. So I would say advisor before I became...
And you, during this campaign?
No.
Did they just not follow your advice?
Sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. I think on the economy they didn't. On Scotland they didn't. On foreign policy, they didn't. On stuff like how to do the interview well. But that to me is tactical. That's about tactics. And winning is all about strategy. You see, I'll give you a really good example of that. This thing about Scotland and the SNP. They were strategic, by the way. They've been strategic over the last 20 years. And they've been resilient. There was a documentary about Nicola Sturgeon, the leader of the Scottish Nationalists, on TV the other night. They did a compilation of all the times she's stood at account where she's lost an election. I can't remember, it was 8 or 9. Lost. Now, I know a lot of people in politics who'd have given up after 2. In fact, I know a lot who'd have given up after 1, right? She kept going. And she made the weather in the last election. So what happened was that when the polls started to say, this is looking like Labour minority government with the SNP, the Tories, fair play to them from a kind of brute force strategy point of view, they ventilated that for all it was worth. They did a poster of of Alex Salmond, the former leader of the SNP, with Ed Miliband in his pocket. They did one of Nicola Sturgeon with Ed Miliband in her handbag. Powerful images, and the message was economy and leadership. Do you want Ed Miliband as a leader of a minority government propped up by the SNP, or do you want David Cameron, whether you like him or not, at least he looks the part? Economy, these are the guys who crashed the car, brackets, and we never rebutted that, brackets. Do you want them back in charge, propped up by a woman who's more left-wing, wants to tax more, spend more, borrow more? So it played into their strategy. The tactics and the strategy came together, and that's when it works. Why did you read that blog? Why didn't you read the more recent blogs that have been much more reflective? And
so, if you were to sum up what the British Labour Party has to do now, what would you say? What's your advice?
1, understand the scale of defeat. Don't do what we did last time, which is basically think, oh, well, that didn't go very well. Let's sort of, get a new leader and hopefully it'll go better. Have a proper understanding of why we lost. And I don't think it is about, you've already got people saying we weren't left-wing enough. We didn't do some of those things that I talked about. We didn't have a clear strategy on the economy. So you've got to get the right leader. I am going to be saying if I've done an interview with the Times, which is coming out sometime this week, and I do think that, you see, you've got to remember about this. This is the Labour Party electing the person that we're saying to the public, you should elect this person as your Prime Minister. That's quite a big deal, right? That's how we should see it. And I'm going to say that all of the people who are on the ballot paper at the moment, they might be a good Prime Minister. But I think it's very, very hard to make that judgment based upon what we know of them so far, because it's such a step up. Therefore, I think when they're elected, they should commit to having another reconfirmation process later in the Parliament. Because if we're not winning, if we don't look like we could win, then you have to do what sports teams do. You make change. And for 2 elections in a row now, we've gone into the election with lots of us talking to each other and saying, this isn't going very well, I'm not sure. And then going out to the public and saying, this is the right guy and this is the right strategy, and you're just wrong to think what you think. One of the first rules of elections, shall I tell you my rules of elections?
Go ahead.
1, if you see fruit, eat it. 2, if you drink water, drink it. If you see water, drink it. 3, if you see a bed, sleep in it.
And then
4, the public are never wrong, even when they are.
You worked with Tony Blair for many years. What would you say that makes him a different kind of leader compared to Ed Miliband?
I don't think it's fair to compare him to Ed. I'd rather. Can I rephrase your question?
Please do. I'm curious.
No, just what made Tony a very special kind of leader. Okay. Strategic mind. Bold. Saw politics as being about. I give you an example of his boldness. We won in May the 1st, 1997. In my diaries, copies of which should also be here, but aren't. You bastards. Hi, Najma. I think it's on the 12th of May. So we've been in power 11 days. We're at the height of the honeymoon. We're doing big things. We're making the Bank of England independent. We've announced there's going to be a Scottish Parliament. That's gone well. There's going to be the minimum wage. The Queen's speech has happened. Tony comes into the office and he says, quotes, "I've worked out how to do Northern Ireland." Okay? That's bold. The truth is he had, though. He'd worked out the strategy for it. And which was, it's complicated, but he worked out the strategy. And from the next few years, we just never let go. We never let go. So I'd say he's bold, he's determined, he's resilient. I think both Tony and Clinton suffer a little bit in terms of how they're seen because they are such good communicators. I think sometimes people think that's what they are. But I'd say they're both very good decision makers. I think they're very good with people. So yeah, he's got a lot of qualities. And he was determined to get the team that he wanted.
And he got you. He did. Because the thing is, you were a journalist at the time, first at Today newspaper and then at the Daily Mirror. And then after the death of the Labour leader, John Smith, Tony Blair became the opposition leader, and he called you. And as a matter of fact, he actually went to southern France to meet with you and convince you to be a part of his team. And Neil Kinnock warned you against doing that, but you still did it. Why?
Well, actually, it's even more complicated than that. He asked me to do it, and I said no. I didn't really mean it, though. It was a bit like the blog. I don't want you to think that I always say things I don't mean, because it's very rare that I say things I don't mean. But I sort of felt... Do you know, it's really strange, this. When John Smith died, I was a journalist, and I used to do this thing on the television every Thursday morning, I think it was. I used to do a paper review at the BBC. And you had to go in at 4 a.m. and read the papers and do this sort of thing and write a script and blah, blah, blah. I'm getting a car. I'm getting driven back to the office after doing this. So it's sort of still reasonably early in the morning, and I got a phone call from somebody actually who later worked for me, who at the time worked for John Smith, and I could tell in her voice that something really bad had gone on. And she said, "Have you heard about John?" I said, "No, what?" She said, it looks like he's had another heart attack." And so I knew she was actually telling me he was dead. And the thing is that I instantly knew Tony Blair was going to be the next leader and I was going to work for him. I just knew it. It was like I could see it clearly. And then I spoke to Tony and to Gordon and to lots of them in the next few days. And that night I was doing a tribute to John Smith. Everybody was doing all these tributes on the television. I was doing one on Newsnight, BBC Newsnight. And I said to them, "I'm only doing this if you don't ask me about the future. I'm only doing this as a tribute to John Smith. I'm not saying anything about the leadership, okay?" And they said, "Fine, yeah, fine. Live television, end of the interview. Final question, who's the next leader of the Labour Party?" And it was just an instinct. I just said, "Tony Blair," like that. Now, Gordon, to this day, thinks that was part of some plan. It wasn't. It just came out. And the reason I thought that is just because, it's like I said earlier, sometimes a question that you've asked in theory gets a different answer when you actually need to ask the question properly. So he then asked me to work for him. I said, my partner Fiona was totally opposed to it. My parents were opposed to it. Most of my friends thought I was crazy. And there's a bit of a background to this, because in the 1980s, I'd had a kind of very, very bad breakdown, and I had a drink problem. And part of my thinking was, look, you had a breakdown, you had a drink problem, partly because of the pressure of being a journalist. I mean, you're going to be under a lot more pressure doing this. And Tony came down. Tony got an instinct. And then he heard Neil Kinnock was on holiday with us, and he knew Neil would be trying to get me not to do it. So he literally just turned up with Cherie, his children, and his mother-in-law on holiday.
And what did he say?
He basically, I had Fiona, my partner, and Neil in one room trying to get me not to do it, and Tony and Cherie in the other room trying to get me to do it. And I'll tell you the thing that convinced me. It was back to the boldness point. I just thought, And you know this thing, I've written a chapter in the book about visualization, and based on the fact that I played football with Diego Maradona, who taught me about visualization. I mention that every day of my life, by the way, several times. I played football with Diego Maradona. It's one of my rules of life. I will mention that every day till I die. Fact. And the thing about images and visualization, and here's the thing in campaign, visualization is so important. And I kept having these 3 images come into my head. Okay, in one of them, the elections happened. John Major has won. I'm a journalist in the pen, and he's walking into Downing Street. And I'm thinking, I wonder if I could have helped Tony stop that. In the next one, I'm in the pen, Tony's walking into Downing Street, and I'm thinking, I could have been part of that. And in the third one, Tony's walking to Downing Street, and I'm just behind him. And that's what happened. So that's why I did it. He did inspire me, in part by saying, don't tell anybody, but the first thing I'm going to do at our first party conference is have a complete fundamental debate about our constitution to change in words what we stand for. And I thought, strategy.
So Neil Kinnock and several other people warned you against saying yes. Mm-hmm. But the story also goes that you warned Tony Blair not to hire you. Why was that?
Not quite true. I warned him of all the things in my past and in my character that might be difficult. I was very, very honest and open. The drinking, the breakdown. My first ever publication was in what I think we would call in the old days a gentleman's leisure magazine, which, needless to say, was reprinted not long after I took the job. I'm a massive football fan, which is not a crime, but there was a period in my life when I was just a little bit punchy, shall we say. So there was all sorts of stuff that I just...
You actually punched a lot of people, haven't you?
I haven't punched a lot of people, no.
You've punched some people.
Yeah, not many. I haven't punched anybody for a long time. Not for a long time. I haven't punched anybody, I don't think, since Tony became leader of the Labour Party. I've been punched. Is
that true, though? Because I remember a part in your published diary where you punch, is it Peter Mandelson?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
It was such a pathetic punch that it's not even worth talking about. It was like a... I do box, though. I do box.
But there was a... back to being serious, but you mentioned that you had big troubles in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. Could you just elaborate on that, please?
Well, I was a journalist. I've always had depression, but I probably have never admitted it. And I think I used to drown it in alcohol. But because I've always had... One of my best friends at university once told Fiona, she says, when she was first getting together with me, she says, you've got to watch out because he's got demonic energy. Okay? And I do have a lot of energy. But I don't think people noticed because I was so energetic, funny enough, even when I was depressed. And I've never been classified as bipolar, but I do go through these kind of absolute depths of depression and periods of just ridiculous energy. And sometimes they're linked. So, for example, last week a friend of mine died. Some of you may have known, Liberal Democrat former leader Charles Kennedy died of alcoholism. And I can't tell you how many thousands of words I've written about different things since. Lots of them tributes to him. But I've also I get energy in grief. I get energy in being down. I think it's the way I deal with it. And so I was in a new job. I was promoted way above my depth. I was drinking too much, working too much. I cracked up. I literally cracked up. I never understood why they called it cracking up until it happened. And what happened was that my brain exploded in a very public place. I was with Neil Kinnock in Scotland. Everything in my life seems to happen with the Labour Party in Scotland. It's just unbelievable. So my whole brain was and I literally mean exploding. And there will be people here who know what I'm talking about here. You have... so I was hearing music here, bagpipes, brass bands, arguments, people shouting at each other. My mind was literally just exploding. And I got arrested. It's funny how you need somebody to lead you towards that. If somebody tells you you've got a problem, come with me, you need to be led towards that conclusion. And these two, they're actually special branch policemen, secret policemen. And they came up and they said, one of them just said, are you okay? I said, I don't think I am. He said, do you think you should come with us? I said, yeah, I think I should. I said, who are you? And they arrested me for my own safety. Took me away, locked me up. And I was now in complete, total meltdown. Took all my clothes off, started banging the wall. Eventually a doctor came. They allowed me out to go to hospital and very, 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 very slowly recovered. This is going to sound really odd, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because I totally sorted myself out. I could not have done the job. I talked about resilience earlier. I couldn't have done the job for as long as I did with Tony if that hadn't happened. Because it gave me resilience.
What was it about you that made you the right person, the right man for the job that Tony Blair needed done?
Well, I hope. Well, I know I made a difference, but I think actually, and this was Tony's strength, was that it wasn't just me. He had a group of people around him. Jonathan Powell, Chief of Staff, who was a former diplomat. Angie Hunter, who was his lifelong friend. Peter Mandelson. Charlie Faulkner, another close personal friend going back. Derry Irvin, another one. And then we had these young people who were coming up. And back to the thing about teamship, everybody knew what their job was. Jonathan didn't want to do my job, I didn't want to do his job. But I think what I brought, one was an understanding of the workings of the media. And I think also I had back to this thing about visualization and seeing where things are going. One of my favourite quotes in the book, some of you will know this, Wayne Gretzky, the ice hockey player, skate to where the puck is going, not where it is. Where are you going? And the thing is, I could see the way the media was developing. And, we were going through this. I did an interview with one of your newspapers earlier, and he's going on this spin doctor and blah, 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 blah. The fact is that I was doing the job at a time the media age was becoming a reality, and it was changing. And you had to be ahead of the curves. Otherwise, you were going to get... Because our media is much, much more aggressive than yours. If you don't have a strategy to deal with them, if you're not getting through to the public despite them, you're going to get blown away. And so I think I brought that. And the other thing is, I love words. I love writing. So I briefed most people in doing the job that I did. Their job was to brief the press. My job was to brief the press, but I was also a speechwriter. I was a strategist. I did all these different things. And I think the other thing, if you're in a position of leadership, like, whether it's Jonas here, whether it's Hella in Denmark, whether it's Barack Obama, it doesn't matter. If you're in a position of leadership, you need people around you that you can totally trust, that you can admit when you're scared. You can admit when you're feeling vulnerable. You can say, did I fuck up there? And they're going to be honest with you. They're not going to say, no, it was really good. You're going to be honest. So I think I could bring all that, hopefully, and also my kind of passionate tribal belief in the Labour Party and what we stand for, hating Tories. Especially when they win elections that they don't deserve to win. Bastards.
I'm sure you've given Blair great advice at many times, but if you were to point out, just for entertainment's sake or for learning, what is the most rubbish advice you've given Blair?
Oh my God. Do you know what? I think we did pretty well most of the time. Worst advice I've ever given him. I'll tell you the one that came into my head when you said that. You know how sometimes with a speech, something like the economy, right? For most people, the economy is quite difficult and inaccessible, and trying to get the media to cover the politics of the economy, never quite easy. And I once got him, he was doing one of these big white tie dinners to all the sort of economic and political establishment. I think it was at the Bank of England or somewhere. And we didn't really have a story, okay? We didn't have anything new to say. So I said, we're on the way there, and I said, I've written a line for you at the top, which I've briefed, and it's going to be like, you know, the media have bought it. It's going to be the line, and the line was, "Stability is sexy." So the speech was all about delivering economic stability. Okay, so Tony gets there. He hadn't really been listening, and he gets there. And he's reading the speech, and he gets to this line, and he just can't bear to deliver it. So the newspapers are all. So then the story became about, you know, because you know they love process. Why didn't he say it? And it was briefed, and it wasn't. So there was that one. That wasn't very good. I'll tell you. Is that enough?
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Apart from that, I think we did okay.
Is there any advice that you regret not having given?
The only times when it got really difficult was when it got personal. Now Tony and I did not fall out. The only time he criticised me to my face was when I went what he called off the reservation, and it was about a thing where Cherie, his wife, who got a very, very hard time from the press, and she was really being put through the mincer about something. I can't even remember the detail now. And she told, so we were having to brief on this because the press were asking about it all the time, and she told us something that turned out not to be borne out. And I understand why she did, because she was thinking, why the hell should I have to say everything I do and da-da-da. So we then briefed that, no, that's nonsense, that hadn't happened. And it turned out that it did. And I felt really, really let down because, of course, the media loved to say I was a liar. No, I don't think I am a liar. In fact, I find it very, very difficult not to be frank about everything. So, and I did go off the reservation. But so that was when it got difficult, was when it was a combination of the personal and the political. But no, generally, I mean, I wish I'd been more insistent. I think I used to argue, I thought we should, back to the mental health stuff, we liberalised our alcohol laws. I think that was a massive mistake. We now have what's called 24-hour licensing, and I wish we hadn't done that. I wish I'd argued against that more. But you see, I wasn't the policy person, I was the communications person. I wish I'd argued more for compulsory voting, which I've always believed in, and we don't do, and I think we should. But no, generally. And the other thing we did, not fall out, but there's a newspaper in England called the Daily Mail, which I hate. In fact, I did an interview with one of your guys earlier, and he brought a copy of it, and I said, I'm sorry, I don't allow it in my presence, and I tore it up. And we did this thing with the Mail called Mail Watch. We used to publish a daily rebuttal of all the stories in the paper that were wrong. Hundreds of pages every week. And eventually Tony's colleagues, they got to him and they said, and he got to me and he said, let's just stop it. And I think that was a mistake. But no, we agreed about most things. And we had a lot of laughs. I think that's important in these relationships between leaders and their teams. You've got to be able to take your shoes off, take your tie off. I must admit, one of the funniest sights ever in my life was in Japan. Tony lying on a bed in his room wearing nothing but a pair of underpants and a crash helmet, reading the guide to earthquakes the guide to what to do in earthquake in a Japanese accent.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
That's going to stay with me for years to come.
Is that the most significant thing I've said all day?
I think so. But I can tell that even though you're a communications person, obviously you are a policy person as well. You do have opinions on policy. So I have to ask you, if you were to analyze like the biggest challenges for social democracy right now in Europe, what would that be? I
think they're big. I've just done an interview with your television. What's the BBC called?
NRK.
Yeah. And they showed a map of the different colours of Europe, of where social democrats are kind of in power. I was very pleased to see actually that Albania and Malta, both countries in which I've worked with the socialist parties, Albania, we had a landslide, let me tell you. But it was not very red, the map. I think there's lots of things going on. The first is, I think this is why I worry about Labour. Think about the word Labour. It's part of our history. It's who we are and what we are. But it's not. That's not all that we are. And I think that if you look at, see, what I think is really interesting to say about your politics, it seems to me there's a fairly settled view that you've got to have a kind of enterprising economy, you've got to have support for business, you've got to believe in wealth creation. But there's also an understanding that you have to have a proper welfare system, you have to have a proper healthcare system, you have to look after the old, you have to look after the weak and the sick. Now what's happening in our country, and that's why I think Tony Blair was so successful, New Labour was successful, because it was the first time that we'd stopped this nonsense of saying the Tories are for business and we're for work and we're for the workers and we're for the poor. We could be both. And I think you've got that here, where it's kind of embedded in your political system. We've got a system in Britain, a situation in Britain now where the Tories, they're going to rip the welfare state to shreds. That's what they're going to do, because they've always wanted to do it. It's what they believe in. They believe that. And so I've forgotten the question. What was the question?
The standing of social democracy,
the
biggest challenges.
So the challenges, right. So I think one of them comes from the fact that we all enjoyed the upsides of globalization without really involving people in an assessment of the downsides of globalization as they see them. So one of the big ones of those would be immigration. I think we always struggled in our time in office. We struggled to find the right way to talk about immigration, the right way to handle it, the right policy perspectives. And Ed Miliband had difficulty with this as well in the election. So then UKIP come along, and they only got one seat, but they got a fair share of the vote, and they dragged the Conservative Party a little bit with them. So I think immigration was difficult. I think the other thing I'd say is that we're Labour parties. You're the Arbeit Party, work, Labour. The reality is, looking at here, where pretty young, lots of young people in the audience, it's impossible to say to somebody you're going to have a job for life. We're here to protect your job, because most people are going to do lots of different jobs. So that then takes you into the agenda of lifelong learning and so forth. So I think there's that. I think then the other thing I would say is that the crash. You see, Ed Miliband, I understand why he thought this, because in some countries this did happen. Greece did move to the left as a result of the crash. Spain does seem to have moved to the left as a result of the crash. But I don't think that Britain did. I think, if anything, Britain moved a little bit to the right because it was scared, because people were a bit scared. And I'll tell you the other thing that's happened, which I think just makes people angry about politics generally, is that there hasn't been a reckoning about the global financial crisis at all. So what people feel in Britain, and this is why the Scottish nationalists again did quite well, because they hammered this message harder than us, is that you've got a situation where, because we were accepting the blame for this crash, we were not rebutting their charges on the economy. What that meant was, you've got this situation with the bankers in particular, and the economic system. I don't know, has anybody seen the film Inside Job?
Yeah.
Oh, those who haven't, watch it. Inside Job. It's a film, it's a documentary, which apparently hasn't been screened on television because they don't want to show it. I don't know if that's true or not, but somebody told me that. But I watched it online the other day. It's Inside Job by a guy called Charles Ferguson, added with a little bit of glamour, narrated by Matt Damon. And it just tells the story in a way that's accessible and you understand. Yes, it's a polemic, but basically exposes what is essentially a criminal conspiracy by people to get incredibly rich and then get bailed out when they screw it up. By governments who then have to put up your taxes, cut your benefits, and make massive cuts in your public services.
But what would be the ideological answer to that? The social
I don't know.
democratic
I don't
answer?
know. I don't know. But I do think that something big is going to have to give in our systems, because I don't think that reckoning has happened. So I think what's happened is that maybe that this thing about, I mean, I know you're completely different to the Conservatives here. We're completely different to the Conservatives in Britain. But too many people, because we were all sort of pretty pro the globalization thing, pro the enterprise economy message, too many people look at us and say, you're all the same. And then that's when they start to look for extremes. So I think for social democracy, I think we've got to, the basic values shouldn't change. We do believe in fairness. We do believe in social justice. But I think that how you apply that, I think, is very different in this post-crash world. And I think there does have to be some kind of reckoning. I just don't know what it is. I don't know a single person involved in this thing that I saw in this film. I don't know a single person. You've got loads of people in Britain going to jail because they're not paying their benefits. I didn't see any of these people with their yachts and their jets and their houses in the Hamptons. I didn't see them going to jail. So I think that, I don't know how to explain this, but I don't think that we have quite understood the depth of that anger, and that we're all paying a political price for it. And this guy in Scotland, he actually said to me, I don't know whether this translates. It's a pretty Scottish expression. I said to him, I don't understand why you say. This guy said to me, he says, do you know what? I hate Labour now more than the Tories. I said, well, I don't understand how you can say that. He said, I'll tell you how I can say that. It's because I always knew I would get humped by the Tories.
I'm going to share a quote with you, and I'd like to hear your opinion on
coat?
that. A quote.
Oh, quote.
I don't think my coat would fit you.
No.
But
I love the way it matches everything, though.
That was a plan.
That's smart, and my tie as well, with UKIP colours. Not very good for somebody with a Pakistani background to be wearing that, I'm telling you.
No. Trying my very best to deal with the immigration challenges. Dressing the part. Okay, The Guardian. They wrote after the election, and this is the quote.
Okay.
Labour is a self-consciously progressive party dominated by highly educated people who tend to believe that they see the world more clearly and understand people's interests better than they do themselves. The default instinct of both the educated and the centre-left. Do you agree?
I think there's a lot in that. I think too often we see the world as we want it to be, rather than as it is. I mean, give an example. You talk about the ethnic minorities in Britain recently. They just did a breakdown of the vote. 1/3 of the ethnic minorities voted Conservative. Most Labour people look at that and say, how did that happen? Because they always voted for us. And I think that sometimes the waves of change within the public happen faster than the politicians realise. And so I don't think it's a default position of social democracy, and I still think our values are better than right-wing values by a long way. But I think we're kidding ourselves if we think either that the public are sitting there thinking there's any politician that's going to sort of, address all of their challenges. And here's the other thing that I think is happening. And I had breakfast with your leader today, and I was really impressed by him. And I'll tell you why. Because when I meet a lot of political leaders and political campaigners and what have you, I just said to him, what do you see then? How do you see this election panning out? And a lot of leaders would say, well, this is going to be our big message, and we're going to invest a lot in social media, and we're going to get these bright guys in from this and that. And they actually said, well, I think we're facing some really, really big challenges, and we have to be on the right side of the arguments and build the right side of the arguments for all of them. And he went through them. He said growth, population, aging, urbanization, technology, and climate change. Now that's that. And I just went, oh my God, to hear a progressive left of centre leader express his politics in terms of big challenges for the future, I think that's what it should be about. And so, and you see, the thing is, I don't think the public anymore will buy this idea of politicians standing up there and saying, vote for me, and you will have a job, and you will have a nice home, and your kids will all go to a great school, and when you get sick, you're going to be looked after, and the roads are going to be great, and we're going to have enough money to spend on the military, and we're going to do everything you need to do. I don't think they buy it anymore, because there's been so much has gone wrong. Added to which, they know another downside of globalization is individual governments have nothing like the power that they used to do. Corporations have lots of power. International institutions have lots of power. And so far better, I think, is a more honest dialogue with the public that says, look, I can't promise you everything. Vote for me, though, and I will tell you what I think the big challenges are facing the world. And I'll tell you how I think I can address them. And I'll tell you how I think you can help me do that. Because it's not just about me doing this alone. And I think that kind of dialogue just resonates with people much more than, I'm going to do this for you, I'm going to do this for you. So I think the whole thing has got to sort of turn upside down. And if it doesn't, I worry. And I'll tell you the other thing is I think that democracies, I've written about this in the book as well. Don't get me wrong, sports fans, it's mainly about sport. But I've written about, well, not mainly, but sort of 50%. But I've written about how I think democracies are operating at such a disadvantage to non-democracies, let alone to terrorist organizations and the like, who can... just think about it. I used to think about this in the whole kind of, when bin Laden was around. So there's us. Okay, we got battered for the whole communications over the Iraq war and so forth. Even though we took massive care about our communications, contrary to what people say, all bin Laden had to do was sit in a cave with a camera on a tripod, say something menacing, give it to a guy on a motorbike, who drove it to somebody else on another motorbike, and eventually get it to Al Jazeera, and it would dominate the media agenda for days. Right? It's hard to deal with that. It's hard to work against that when you talk about trying to get your message out. Those guys don't have any difficulty getting their message out. So I think that you've got to... I think we've got to be more honest and realistic about assessing our... I think we're in a combination of the comfort zone and a feeling of sort of rampant superiority about ourselves when actually I'm not sure it's merited at the moment. Does that make sense?
It does. And it does give us a lot to think about. And I would love to chat more about that. But I know that even though we're enjoying this, you really want to be somewhere else, don't you? Because the real reason you came to Norway was... What was that?
I've told you it's to watch football. But that doesn't mean... What time's the kickoff? I hate being late for the start of matches. I hate that. At Arsenal, any Arsenal supporters here? Right, well, can you explain to me why that second tier is always empty for 10 minutes after half time? Anyway, now listen, Edina, stand up, Edina. That's Edina, she's jumping up and down, wave your arm. We're trying our best on this nonsense about the books. I hope Random House are still watching. If you go to Edina and say, I would like there are 3 books available, Winners and How They Succeed, which is my latest one, #1 bestseller in the UK, about winning in business, politics and sport. Interviews with Jose Mourinho, Floyd Mayweather. He's a winner. The Blair Years, extracts from my diaries, All in the Mind, my first novel about mental illness. Edina will take your details, take your name, 150 kroner. Is that a lot?
No, that's okay.
Okay. 150 kroner each. That's ridiculous because one's a hardback, one's a paperback. Huh? And she will do that. When I get back to London, I will, once I've gone in and kicked their asses because the books aren't here today, I will sign them, personalise them, dedicate them. I'll even put Oslo 2015 at the bottom, even though I'll be in London.
Great.
That's how embarrassed I am that you came here today, and then we're done.
Great. Alastair Campbell, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You didn't ask me about how to win the election. Thank you. Hold on, before you go, I do want to say one thing, okay? I've thought about your election. How many people here are Labour? How many people here are from the other side? At least you're honest. You've all got beards. Right, you've got a campaign against them on the grounds that you do not want a government run only by people with beards. Okay? No, so I'll tell you how I think you can. No, actually, because they're here, I'm not going to say. Thank you very much.
Yes. I want to thank you so much for coming. We were thinking about giving you a flower, but you're going to a football match, so it won't really fit.
Is that for me?
Yeah, but you won't get it because you don't want to
I don't
take
mind.
it. But Hadia is getting flowers.
I have to. Have one from me.
Great.
But for you, we got, so you never forget Norway. This is a Marius-genser.
What?
You will open up. It's a Marius-genser. It's a special jumper,
Yeah.
very traditional for Norway.
Okay.
And it will keep you warm tonight at the football match.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for coming. And for those of you who do not want to go to bed tonight, you can just stay here because we have a meeting tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock.
Do you really wear these?
We do. They're nice.
Oh yeah, actually I saw lots of these on Lillehammer.
Exactly. You will like them.
Thank you.
Tusen takk for at dere kom, og som sagt, jeg er velkommen tilbake i morgen klokka 8 til et annet spennende agendamøte. Vel hjem.
Thank you.